Good morning, everyone. We'll give everyone a few seconds to get on before we jump into things.
Good morning. Or yes, it's morning everywhere that I think we are. I don't know, like, conferences, I'm just like, always have to double check. I'm like, wait, is it morning for everyone? And I'm like, as long as everyone's on the, in the US, I think it's still morning for everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Let me see. This is Doris. I'm the interpreter. So I was waiting to get in. So thank you for letting me in.
Yeah, glad that you're here with us.
Thank you.
For joining us.
But now let's see. I think that please you have to, on your end, you have to add like a interpreter, like to click in the icon.
Okay, yeah, I'm so sorry, Lauren and Willa. Do you mind if we just take a quick minute to get the interpretation set up? I apologize.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so sorry about that. Hi, Doris. Yeah, thank you. So let's get that set up. So there is a way for both of you to get to trigger something on your end, and then Doris will do something on her end. So as presenters, if you click, there's a globe icon in between the breakout room and the reactions icon in the bottom. Do you see that?
Globe icon.
And then it should say interpretation or interpreter. And then if you select the English channel, do you see that at all?
I see security. I see participants, chat, share screen, pause, record, breakout rooms, reactions.
Okay. Yeah, I see it on my end. So what I'm going to do is make you, Lauren, I just made you host. So that was the ticket. Okay. So if you click the English selection there, and then Doris, you're doing the Spanish selection, correct? Okay.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And Lauren, can you just test out, just say a couple words, and then Doris will see if it works on her end?
Sure. Oh wait, let me start it.
Hola,
okay.
Voy a empezar. I think, I'm sorry, because I was here yesterday. I have to see here on my end in the screen something that it is the interpretation. So I need to see the English and the Spanish like options, and then I have to click here on my screen the Spanish version, and then everyone will be able to to hear my Spanish interpretation, but I do not see it right now.
Okay. Is it on now? It says that English and Spanish interpretation is available.
Okay, I think that you need to, I don't know, to add. Could you please click on that just to see?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll try and click manage again. It says interpreter 1, but it says not joined. So
exactly.
I'm not sure.
Exactly. I need to see something here on my end as yesterday to click and join you, but I do not see it. I don't know why.
An option. Okay. Do you
oh, you know what? I can do it. And we want English to Spanish?
Yes, either one, because if someone will have a Spanish question, I'll translate it in. Oh, here it is. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You got it. So now I'm going to say, okay.
Doris, you're muted now. But yeah, it looks like for some reason it cut off your sound. There you go.
And Lauren, do I also need to do whatever you did?
Possibly.
So is it working now on your end, Doris? Okay. So so everything's good on your end, Doris, we can move forward? Okay. Okay. Great. Lauren and Willa, thank you so much. I apologize. And this is a new offering we're doing this year for the first time at WFAN. So there's some learning curves for us. So thank you so much for your patience.
Of course. Am I all set too? Because I didn't do anything on my end.
I think we can only have one host, and it has to be the host that triggers that. And so Doris, did you just hear what Willa said? Okay, and that's coming through. So we're good.
All right. Thank you everyone for being patient with us this morning. I think we are going to go ahead and jump in. So yeah, welcome and let's get started. I can start by introducing myself. I'm Willa Pullman. I'm the Director of Programming at City Blossoms. And Lauren, I'll kick it off to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lauren Newman, and I'm the, what is a mouthful, Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative Program Manager at City Blossoms. We'll shorten that to YEC for today, so that I don't have to keep on saying that.
It'll save us time too. So thank you for joining us today for Cultivating Young Leaders, digging into youth-led garden-based business. We're really excited to be here with you all and both share some of what we've learned as well as get to hear from you all and answer any questions that we can or hear about your experiences. We are going to talk a little bit about City Blossoms just to give you some context for our work. We're going to talk in depth about Mighty Greens, which is the youth-led entrepreneurship business that has been developed through this program at City Blossoms. Then we're going to talk about sort of some key points that we want to share around the YEC program and make space for questions and discussion. So City Blossoms was started in 2008. We develop and implement innovative programming and tools that build healthy neighborhoods and create sort of creative green spaces for ages 2 through 19. These are our various programs. So we have Early Growers, which collaborates with early childhood centers to get kids out in green spaces and connecting with nature. We have our School Garden Partners, which is partnering with different schools across the DC area to both create green spaces that are unique to a school community, as well as supporting teachers in implementing the garden into their regular day-to-day program. And then of course, YEC, which we're gonna dive in deep with today. As well as our Community Green Spaces program, which is sort of like drop-in gardens that are kid focused, but they're also open to adults and families. And those spaces, you don't have to sign up for anything, but the hope is that they create green space that's very neighborhood centric. And then finally, we have trainings and resources. We try to take everything that we've learned from all of our work and create resources that we can then share out and support other people doing amazing work across the country and share a little bit of what we've learned. This is a sort of illustration of what we hope our programming and sort of similar programming helps to build and create for youth. So the hope is that programs like this can create sort of space for youth to build confidence and become leaders and stewards in their communities. And I think YEC really embodies what we're trying for, at least. And so on that note, we can kind of dive into the Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative program known as YEC.
Great, thanks, Willa. So at City Blossoms, we were pretty intentional about creating a clear distinction between our YEC program and Mighty Greens, the business that grew out of that program. And by creating differentiation between the two, it gives students greater autonomy in how they organize and how they design their business without having to coordinate with City Blossoms every step of the way. And this creates stronger feelings of ownership over the business for the youth while still making it possible for City Blossoms to shape and shift the YEC program model to fit how we as an organization are growing. And then another possibility that we wanted to consider was if the Mighty Greens youth staff ever wanted to kick off their training wheels and create a full-fledged business. We wanted to make sure that this was possible. Before we dig into what we consider to be the foundational pieces of the YEC-like program, we'll be sharing some videos of youth in action and also talk about some of the various products and services that contribute to the youth's entrepreneurial experiences with Mighty Greens. To kick us off, we'll hear from current Mighty Greens youth staff member Anaya as she gives her Mighty Greens pitch, followed by a little bit of an older PBS NewsHour clip summarizing Mighty Greens' mission and work. Willa, there's no sound.
On mute, that's the problem. My apologies. We'll start that over again, everyone. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Anaya. Hi. And we are Mighty Greens. Since 2012, we have been a youth-led business that develops products using organic, locally grown produce. Some of the products we sell include herb, salts, lotion, and teas. We are based in Washington, D.C., and our produce is grown in gardens and farms throughout the city, including gardens at Kelly Miller, Cardoza, and Eastern. Our goal is to promote youth entrepreneurship, health and wellness, and community growth.
These students are learning how to grow and harvest vegetables and other edible plants. Rasha is a 12th grader at Eastern Senior High School.
So one day I was going to soccer practice. I was just walking by the greenhouse. And I was like, oh my God, what is that beautiful, magnificent thing, like greenhouse over there? And like the sun was just radiating. It was just like, oh. And so basically I just peeked my head in the door. I was like, so what is this? And they were like, you know, this is Mighty Greens.
Mighty Greens is a youth-led cooperative whose mission is to improve DC's access to healthy food and food education.
Fish peppers from the garden, the hot one. DC is a food desert. So that basically means that people in DC have a hard time having access to food, whether it's a grocery store not being close enough to them or transportation to that grocery store.
According to DC Hunger Solutions, every day in the District of Columbia, nearly 1 out of 7 households struggles to buy nutritionally adequate and safe food.
Sometimes we just wake up and think that, oh, you know, everybody's eating. But in reality, a lot of people don't eat. So a little girl might not eat today.
Camila is an 11th grader at Eastern Senior High School.
I help people in my community learn how to grow vegetables or even learn how to eat healthy with the vegetables. One day, maybe our city could not be a food desert.
So you've done the transplanting once before.
My name is Malka Roth, and I am an educator for City Blossoms Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative program. It's really about creating a space where students can connect with themselves, with each other, and with the world around them.
The CSA model, where we know going into this.
Last year, Mighty Greens harvested over 1,200 pounds of food and is hoping to surpass that this year.
About 50% of our produce gets sold. About 25% gets donated to our partners, and then 25% gets taken home by students or used for on-site recipes. It's really important within this work that the students know that they're growing food for themselves.
Students also develop entrepreneurial skills by creating products and selling them at farmers markets.
We have 2 herb salts from our 2 schools that we represent, Eastern and Cardozo. One's called Herbs of Eastern, which has kosher salt, thyme, oregano, and rosemary. And we make it by dehydrating all the herbs we get out the garden and then mixing it with salt, equal parts each. The customers are like, oh, this is really cool. Like, and then you're like, oh my, that's really good. Like, you feel really good about it.
Through Mighty Greens, students Eden and Malik have developed new relationships with food.
This greenhouse has taught me a lot of things I didn't know before. Now I know about like where the food I eat come from.
Before Mighty Greens, I really didn't have a relationship with food and nature. I just ate whatever I wanted. And now that I do have a relationship with food and nature, I give thanks back to the earth, because without the right soil and earth, you wouldn't be able to have fresh foods.
Gardening and running a business help these students understand themselves and realize that they can change their environment.
A lot of people in high school don't know where direction in life is going. And like, if they had like a program where they could go to and learn how to do a business and keep it steady and learn how to count money and like how to talk to customers and learn customer service, they would be able to like understand those things that you don't learn in school on a regular day. And it would kind of be like a life skill for them. I feel like if I didn't join this, I wouldn't be the person I am today.
For the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs, I'm Kevin Berman, Washington, D.C.
All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed those clips. I personally enjoy hearing directly from the students themselves about how, the program has impacted them, and being a part of Mighty Greens has impacted them. So we definitely wanted to include their voices in this presentation, even though none of them could physically be with us today. But before we dive into like the logistics of the YEC model, we just wanted to point out some of the key products and services that Mighty Greens offer, and how they kind of evolved over time. So when the program started at Eastern back in 2013, we recognized a really special asset that would allow the students to keep busy during the winter months. And that happened to be a greenhouse, the same greenhouse that Rasha said the light kind of just shone through. The ability to grow from seed thousands of seedlings each winter created a really unique and valuable product for the DC community. And as a result, they were a hit. Seedling sales and contracts quickly became a reliable and lucrative source of income for the business, as the students were able to build relationships with local schools and organizations who began to rely on Mighty Greens grown seedlings each spring and summer. One of those organizations, of course, being City Blossoms. We love that we are able to support the youth and reinforce that they are creating products that are high quality and in demand. And then on the next slide, we have an example of one of our seedling sales. So Mighty Green seedling sales often take place at one or more of City Blossoms community green spaces in conjunction with a holiday such as Mother's Day or an Easter celebration in the spring. And we found that when we align these sales with upcoming holidays, it often increases turnout for the events, which leads to more sales and therefore more customer interactions for the students. Another product offering that the students have developed over time have been the value-added products. And Mighty Greens have experimented with a variety of products such as herbal body scrubs, body butters, herbal teas, chive blossom infused vinegar, a lot of these things that we're seeing on this slide here. And of course, the tried and true herb salts that were mentioned in the PBS NewsHour clip, the herbs de Eastern and herbs de Cardoza. The youth are able to build the inventory of these value-added products, even when produce isn't as readily available in the gardens. And they are often a crowd favorite, especially around the holiday season, that we typically host with the students, pop-up market style at the schools or in farmers market around the holidays.
Right. So the PBS clip talked a little bit about this, but through the two main spaces that Mighty Greens youth work in, they actually produce a lot of produce, and that produce is taken home by students. It's sometimes sold at farmers markets across the city. You can see a picture here of a sort of community meal that youth had cooked and then shared together. But then youth also pick out different organizations to connect with and donate some of that food. So those are some of the ways that they're sharing their harvest, in addition to running a CSA that gets sold back to educators at the school. So they sort of like will advertise with educators, their teachers, and teachers can sign up for usually somewhere between a 4 to 6 week CSA with produce and value-added products from the gardens that the students are taking care of. And then this next slide is showing some of the other ways that students are sharing their knowledge. And Lauren, feel free to jump in on any of these. A few youth staff who had been with the program for a while in February of 2020 were able to co-present with myself as well as someone from the United States Botanic Garden around how they use their greenhouse and what it means to them. So that we were talking about different ways to use greenhouses educationally, but the youth were really getting to share like what that experience is like for them and really giving educators a picture as to what feels truly like interesting and useful in a program like this. And Lauren, I'll let you share a little bit about some of the virtual opportunities that have come up recently.
Yeah, thanks, Willa. So, as many of us had to adapt, or really all of us had to adapt throughout the duration of this pandemic, one of the really awesome opportunities was having the students start meeting virtually. And that also allowed for more students at different schools that didn't necessarily have a Mighty Greens garden at that school, for those students to also be incorporated into the program. And as a result, that kind of like caused our reach to really spread. And organizations like the Latin American Youth Center reached out to have the students give a peer-led workshop on food justice and food advocacy. Another organization, the Department of Energy and the Environment, also reached out to Mighty Greens to have them share their experiences with their summer youth employment staff. And so in addition to having these opportunities for the youth to share their produce, they're also sharing the knowledge that they're acquiring through this program and this hands-on experience, which, they're getting to practice public speaking skills. They're really practicing that leadership. They're seeing themselves as authorities on these topics, which is just, I think, my favorite part of just really seeing them take charge and own all of the awesome things that they're doing. So with that, we kind of just wanted to pause before we launch into really the foundational elements of a YEC program. Those will be kind of the takeaway portion of how you would even implement a model like this within like the schools that you work with or organizations that you work with. So just kind of a question break on the logistics of Mighty Greens.
Definitely encourage people to come off mute too and ask questions. We're not a huge group, so definitely want to make space for that.
Okay.
I have a question. Thank you. This looks fantastic and exciting. I'm sorry that I came late because I was finishing up the keynote. The question I have, and maybe it was covered in the documentary thing, was about just the factor of growing season being over the summer, and how do you accommodate that with the kids if it's a school program? What do you do to incentivize them to continue to be involved through the summer?
Yeah, great question.
Covered?
No, great question. You know, we have had a partnership with the Summer Youth Employment Program through the mayor's office every year, with the exception of this past summer. We tried something new because they were only allowing for students under the age of 21 to meet virtually, and we really wanted to get our gardens back up and running again. So we tried like a modified summer experience, which didn't necessarily have the incentive of through the Summer Youth Employment Program, they get an hourly rate and wage to work between 20 and 25 hours a week for 6 weeks to fill that like summer, you know, time slot where students are out of school. But we had a really great turnout. We had a core group of, I think 11, 12 students that really went to each space and interacted with the gardens and hosted garden markets and really helped keep those gardens still thriving and the business still thriving. So I guess we learned that the wage stipend isn't necessarily the key driving factor. I think it's just their excitement to really be outside. I mean, I'm seeing that also this year with schools finally being back in person again. And I thought we were going to have a lull in student participation with getting back up and running in the schools. And no, it's been very lively.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren.
No problem. Thank you, Peg. And I see Morgan's question in the chat. How many students does the program work with? So virtually, we worked with close to 175 students this past year. That is definitely scaled up due to the virtual aspect. I would not be able to manage 175 students in person. Typically at each school, we have like between 10 to 15 really engaged, involved, come every programming day students at the sites. And then we have students that kind of like pop in, pop out of the program for a variety of different reasons, which we will definitely get into later on in the presentation.
Yeah, and I think typically in past years, we've worked with like throughout the year, because there's different students that come at different times of the year. It's been somewhere between like 112 and 150 students who engage with the program on one level or another. But as Lauren mentioned, there's definitely some youth who are like there every single opportunity they can be.
Thanks, Morgan. Definitely a silver lining of COVID. All right, are there any other questions before we move on to the foundation of our YEC model?
I guess I would like to chime in with a question. Hi, Lauren. I remember you from an SGO summit. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see
you. I'm struggling with my internet connectivity today, so I'm going to leave my camera off. And I guess my question is still in formulation, but at our organization, Garden to Table, that runs youth programming at 20 school gardens, we have interns come and join us who are similar to the age group of these students, I believe, that you're working with. Mostly we work with elementary school kids otherwise. But as our garden director, I sometimes have a hard time balancing the stresses of productivity and the needs that need to get met at our gardens, and making sure that the 21, 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds who are working with us as interns from the college are having a good time, and enjoying their experience, and that they want to get involved in growing food and being a part of the local food system. I want their faces to look like the faces I see on the screen right now. And so I end up getting home at night and feeling so tired because I've all day juggled the stresses that I feel in my own body about all that needs to get done and making sure everybody has a great time. So I didn't quite know how to phrase this question without sounding like a jerk, but how do you balance the productivity needs with making sure people are enjoying themselves and their summer employment as young people? Mm-hmm.
That's a great question, Laurel. And it's honestly something that we struggle with too. And I feel like it's an ebb and flow, and it requires a certain amount of grace being given to yourself and others. And it really just, sometimes the garden isn't going to look pristine. Sometimes the garden is going to need a little bit of TLC, and we try and help make those things happen with scheduled work days with volunteers, and really try and close those gaps while still focusing on creating a positive experience that isn't about work, in the garden, because they are the Mighty Greens gardens are definitely more production style than our other gardens at City Blossoms, but they're still first and foremost teaching gardens, and so recognizing that is their first purpose, we just kind of try and show a little grace for ourselves and in the space.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Another thing that I feel always helps, whether it's at a work day or during programming, is having music going, and especially after a really long, hard work day. A few years ago, we carried a bunch of rocks into the Eastern Garden, and having a really nice meal afterwards, after we had all lugged these giant rocks in, was a really good way to have worked really hard, but then have a chance to sort of celebrate and sit back to really appreciate all the work that we had done as a community together.
Beautiful. I wish I had been there.
All right, any other questions? We'll also leave space at the end for questions after we've had time to sort of talk through some of the key components of the model as well.
All right, so now that we've explained some of the successes of the Mighty Greens business, we're going to take a deeper look at how we've built the YEC program over the years and explore some of the pieces that we consider to be the cornerstones of the YEC model, like cultivating safe space, considering the capacity, creating an intentional and joyous culture, which, you know, we'll definitely touch more on your question, Laurel, in that section. At its core, the YEC model is designed to enable participants with a chance to join a business on training wheels. So emphasis on training wheels by leveraging existing infrastructure and evaluating capacity from year to year. This allows participants to walk into a business structure that has already been designed by previous youth, but still holds space for them to use their own creativity to grow the company, experiment, and see the impact of their work. The goal of this model is to create a safe and engaging space for youth to develop academic, entrepreneurial, and socio-emotional skill sets that will support them throughout the rest of their lives. And we believe the opportunity to cultivate proficiencies like self-expression, cooperation, and creativity is something that will support them wherever they go.
Right, so in this section, we're going to sort of talk about the many things that we got to learn as we built this program up. We made lots of mistakes. We learned lots of things. This picture is of one of the first groups of youth that we worked with at Eastern High School starting the winter of 2012. And so recruiting young people and sort of figuring out what they wanted, what worked for them was a big part of us starting out. We're also going to talk about sort of establishing partnerships, thinking about different superpowers within all of our roles and sort of key stakeholders at schools, thinking about sustainability and how this program can keep going beyond individuals at schools or at organizations. And then everyone's favorite, we're also going to touch on evaluations a little bit too. So on that note, I think I will hand it off. Oh, actually, no, this is me. So establishing partnerships, this work takes a lot of work. Like, it is not going to happen overnight. It shouldn't be happening because one person is doing it all on their own. And so one of the things that we've felt is like one of the most key components of how we do this work is creating a really strong network of people who have different skill sets and bring different sort of talents to the work. And that way you're sort of building out this network for the youth to really lean into. So people with different knowledge, or the person at the school who's the connector who can make sure that people get out to events, or maybe a local entrepreneur who can come and kind of do a skill share with youth and talk about their business and things that they've gotten to learn. So this network of supporters takes a lot of time to build out. You have to like make space for that. But we truly believe that it is what has made our programming feel the most deep, because there is a true network of people who are willing to come in and support and talk to youth and learn from youth, and is just what makes all of this possible. So that's sort of one of the things that we encourage everyone to think about and make time for if they're starting a program like this, or if they want to expand into a program like this, and really making sure that the network that you create reflects the different needs that come up within the work you're doing. We typically wait until we're invited into a space. We don't want to assume as an organization that a school wants us to come in and create a program like this. And so that's one of the ways in which our partnerships have also come about, is that a school will approach us and ask us to collaborate with them. And again, we try really hard to not just work with one teacher at a school, but make sure that it is something students want, multiple teachers want. And so we're building up this sort of group of people who hold the program. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. So when it comes to who really those partners are and who becomes like the key stakeholders, probably one of the most obvious ones are the youth, because you can't have a youth-led business if there are no young people around to run it. They act as the drivers of the program, and through their participation, they will become the experts of their craft, from production all the way through the sale of their products. In addition to making key business decisions, they also play a critical role in maintaining safe space. Youth who have been working with the program longer should be looked at as role models and leaders for newer participants. Community agreement should be developed as a team and revisited frequently as new students are welcomed into the program. This helps maintain a strong commitment to upholding community as a core value of the program. And we'll definitely get more into how we facilitate this space a little later in the presentation. Another key stakeholder is the program manager. Having one or two people who serve as the point person or persons and support the youth in facilitating programming will help, especially as you are getting started. As a facilitator, this role is meant to support the youth as they create and maintain a safe space, troubleshoot problems as they arise, and make decisions around their business. I have found that in my time as the YEC manager, it is a very careful balance between supporting the youth and not overshadowing youth leadership. One way I try to maintain this balance is by asking questions of the youth that help them think critically and ultimately lead them to think more deeply and reach a more informed conclusion. School stakeholders will be another key in connecting with interested youth and teachers who want to be involved, ensuring that you have this physical space to host programming and ultimately secure the longevity of a program like this. One of the relationships that have been key for us in this work is a staff or faculty member at each school who acts as the school garden coordinator. They are the most involved school stakeholder because it definitely requires more than just one school stakeholder. They build the foundation for connecting us with other relevant stakeholders such as facilities personnel, guidance counselors, and members of the administration. And then lastly, external community partners comprise another essential component of a successful youth-led business. Community partners can include other organizations, neighbors, church groups, and local government agencies. Community partners act as customers, share their skill sets with the youth, and become additional mentors and role models for participants. As you begin to build up your program, think about how you can weave in sustainability from the start by creating a plan that passes on key knowledge to your eventual successor. At City Blossoms, we call this our Bubba plan, or beamed up by aliens. You know, in the case that the person just disappears and you need to keep the program running. The program, or the Bubba plan, is ultimately a paper trail and a way for staff to capture institutional knowledge in whatever form works best for you, such as a binder or an online folder that is shared by all. School garden Bubba plan binders might include a timeline of programming throughout the year, planting plans for the garden, a clear outline of how the garden is managed throughout the year, key contacts, a list of vendors where specific materials are from, and any other key components to pass on. In addition to the regular school garden BUBA plan, the YEC program, and Mighty Greens BUBA plan includes records like when they typically start growing seedlings for the seedling sales and important product recipes so that their product stays consistent. Another key to designing the program for sustainability is the maintenance of key partnerships over time. At City Blossoms, we try to make sure that the program manager is supported by school staff and administrators, and everyone takes pride in the success of the program. This definitely includes the youth participants, as they are the most compelling individuals to convince their peers to join in the fun of running a garden-based business. So that leads us to recruiting young people where they're at. We believe that creating a program with little to no barrier to entry is a crucial component of introducing youth to the joys of entrepreneurship, gardening, and innovating together. This means connecting with students early on to understand what other commitments and responsibilities are competing for their time, as well as what would be compelling incentives for them and their peers to stay engaged. Our program, at least during a typical school year, takes place as after-school programming on site at the schools where we have Mighty Greens Gardens. We have a flexible attendance policy and allow for students to cycle in and out of the program without any penalties, because there are often factors like schoolwork, jobs, and family obligations they have to balance. We found that having a flexible attendance policy led to greater retention over the course of the year. And we create space to check in about expectations the youth have for each other regarding attendance and engagement to ensure that they have the opportunity to hold each other accountable. Another tool we found that worked well was offering the time the youth spend in the program as community service hours. At DC public schools, at least, which I feel like this is also common for a lot of public schools, all high school students are required to complete a minimum of 100 hours of community service in order to graduate. So this is always an incentive that I tout and always mention when recruiting new students for the program each year. So now that we have a good understanding of the pieces that create the foundation of a YEC-like program, we can dive a little deeper into the day-to-day components of our program, such as meetings, community agreements, mission and goal setting, identifying our products and services, and really all the topics on this slide.
Right, meetings. From the very beginning, we found it really important to sort of establish expectations of what a business environment looks like, and sort of defining this from maybe a typical after-school experience that youth have had in other programs at their school. Because it's kind of a combination of an after-school club and a more professional like work setting. So sort of setting those expectations from the beginning. And so the youth staff host meetings that have sort of a clear agenda. It's usually a reoccurring agenda that includes things like upcoming events, sales reviews, financial updates, looking at inventory, and making space for any cooperative decisions that the youth have sort of coming up. And as we first started this program, I'd say that those meetings were often facilitated by the program manager more, but as the program grew and some of the youth had been around for longer, we started to make more space and intentionally like rotate those facilitation roles around the different youth so that there was a chance for leadership to be passed around the group of youth who are consistently participating. And that has felt like a really important component to how we do this work and how these meetings are led.
I always forget to unmute myself. But a real key in having these business meetings and program meetings is starting with community agreements. And those community agreements should always be agreed upon and created with the youth. So although it is important to create community agreements as a group to reflect your values and culture, it can be a little bit of a daunting task to really just say, okay, like what should our community agreements be? So we often start with some foundational agreements that we found to be pretty universal. So number one being respect, by celebrating our unique identities, superpowers, and showing gratitude for our gardens and the creatures in them. Our second universal community agreement is trust, by believing that everyone is coming to work with the best intentions for each other in the team. Our third is responsibility, by using our collective pride for the business to encourage individual accountability to be present, passionate, productive, and professional. And then of course, number four is having fun, by cultivating a safe space to laugh, play, and just breathe, because that is when we are most creative. And by starting here, starting with your core universal community agreements and truths, we're able to have a richer and more robust conversation about what kind of space we want to hold for ourselves and each other. So this slide here contains some prompts you could propose to the youth you're working with to get really the conversation going. Questions like, what does creating safe space look like for your company culture? How do we want to show up as a group and as individuals when we're getting ready to work together? What is the best way for members of the group to communicate with each other? How can we show that we're actively listening to one another? How can people hold themselves and each other accountable? How will decisions be made? What decisions could be made by a majority vote? Are there any topics that may need unanimous consent? And what are ways we can make our space feel fun and inviting to all in the way we talk, act, and decorate?
All right, so once you've sort of established your community agreements and you've figured out sort of a time that you're meeting, defining the mission and goals for your business is going to be really key in figuring out sort of what it is you're there for. And so figuring out your why needs to come kind of early on so that you know why you're showing up every day. So why is the group coming together to create a company versus working with one or with a company or some other after school program that already exists? What's defining it? Thinking about what this team thinks they need to create to enhance their community, what it is they want to focus on. And can this business really support some of the things that youth see as needing to change or be altered within their community? So once you've sort of had time to really discuss some of that, start thinking through brainstorming, writing a mission statement. So that mission statement is going to define the business's reason for existing, and then also sort of give a peek at values and goals that the business has. We found it really helpful as we were supporting youth in defining their mission to really take a moment to look at other organizations and businesses' missions and goals so that they had sort of an example as to what their aim was. And that was a really fun sort of jumping off point to get to research some of that. And a mission statement's typically not super long, so aiming for like a sentence, 2 tops. and you want it to be easy to remember so that the youth aren't like stumbling on it. Like I know at certain points, like it took me a moment to make sure that like I learned City Blossom's mission statement. If it were too wordy, it would be a lot harder for anyone to sort of remember what it is. Even if you understand the why, being able to like clearly share the why out with customers. And so the youth talked a lot about that and practiced their different mission statements to see which felt like the best fit for them. And then once you've had a chance to sort of look at other mission statements, start brainstorming your own, just like your community agreements, you want to figure out how you're making choices around what your mission is. So maybe thinking about picking 2 to 3 mission statements that feel like a good fit, and then getting to vote on those or try them out for a little bit and see which feels like the best fit. The goal is to have this mission statement stick around for a while. So you don't want it to feel like it isn't a good fit for most of the youth, because if you have to change your mission statement every year, it's going to be really hard for you to maybe print some of these things. Like we have here the sort of postcards that have information around the Mighty Greens business. If we had to change the mission statement every year, it would be bad for the Mighty Greens brand, but it would also just be a huge pain because we would have to get things like this reprinted on a really regular basis. So sort of spending a little time to find something that feels really good to everyone and make sure that it's really inclusive and open to everyone, but also leaves enough flexibility that the business can kind of get to grow as it grows with the youth. And then we usually recommend sort of 2 to 6 goals that fit within the mission to sort of clarify it. That's what's worked for us. I think different businesses have different things, so you figure out what sort of works for your community. And this is just a closer look at the card that Mighty Greens has developed over the years, explaining sort of what their business is all about and sort of showing their work. All right. Oh. Go ahead, Lauren, if you want.
I think maybe this is your slide.
I think so too.
Sorry.
I'm not sure either which way. Jump in if I forget anything or if there's anything you want to add. So we wanted to talk a little bit about creating the face of your company. So once you've got your mission and your goals and your community agreements, how are you starting to really build up what your company looks like? And again, trying to do it in both an inclusive and flexible way so that you're allowing this youth business to really sort of transform over time. So coming up with a name, not easy if you're working with a lot of different youth, and also like, at least for our program, it's drop-in. So the group of youth that you're working with may change from day to day. So sort of how to come up with a name that works for everyone, but has enough flexibility for growth. So again, we found it super helpful and would recommend coming up with different examples. So looking at other companies and seeing what feels right. Trying to have youth brainstorm what words feel like they define the business and sort of explain what it is they're doing with their business, and sort of even just having them written up on the wall for a while and kind of creating a word wall that you can sort of move around and experiment with and try out. And again, coming up with a few different names and then allowing for the youth to figure out what feels like the best fit to them, but wanting to make sure that it feels pretty comfortable, because again, you want this to stick around for a second. We've been lucky, Mighty Greens' name has stuck around. And so coming up with something that's sort of catchy, playful, but also reflects the group's mission without being so specific that it doesn't allow for that growth that is going to happen. And definitely short and sweet. You don't want it to be like a massively long name like Youth Entrepreneurship Cooperative Program, because that's a mouthful. And then thinking through your logo too. you can see in this picture, and we'll talk about it a little bit, Mighty Greens has had two different logos. So the one on the left is the original logo that one of the youth that was in sort of the first cohort had sketched out. And then we created a digital version of it. And so wanting to definitely like think about editing down whatever your original drawings are. So making it simplified enough that it's something that can be kind of able to be adapted and used in different settings. Again, looking at other examples is a really great way to do some research, see what youth feel is important to them and feels like a good fit. But probably don't want to switch your logo up right off the bat either, because A, it takes a lot of work. If you're trying to have things like t-shirts or posters, you don't want that to change on a regular basis. But I believe after about 5 or 6 years, the youth sort of had decided that they wanted something a little bit cleaner. They were ready for a logo change. And so they actually decided to go through a redesign process. And so that's how we got to the logo that is on the gray table hanging and some of the t-shirts that you're seeing as well. And as you can see, we try to encourage the youth to pick between 2 to 4 colors that are kind of focus colors, so that you're not like having every single color. There's sort of a consistent look to the market tables that they've developed over the years. And again, just finding stuff that people are gonna be able to live with for a little bit, so that you don't have to be changing the labels or anything like that on a regular basis. And then packaging and advertising. One of the things we realized early on is like packaging and like labels don't need to be crazy expensive, but having something that has a really consistent look kind of transformed that like first couple market tables where people are like, oh, that's cute. And then the difference between that and having something a little bit more professional looking. A lot of times customers are like, whoa, this is a youth-led business. Like they're kind of surprised. And I think that like the youth didn't change that much, but just having that sort of consistent label and packaging look helped them sort of gain an extra level of a professional business that they didn't have at the very beginning. And then finally, social media. Mighty Greens has their own Instagram account that they sort of announce different events. They get to show people what it is they're doing. Definitely wanting to make sure that you talk about sort of safety and expectations around that social media. But that has been a really great way for the youth to be able to build up their brand and also do a lot of communication as well.
Yeah, so, you know, putting all of the work of branding and mission into practice, we had to identify products and or services. Also, in order for the business to begin making money, the youth should guide the decision making over, you know, which products and services they would like to offer. As we mentioned at the start of the presentation, the Mighty Greens youth staff use a combination of offerings that have a diversified system, or that create a diversified system for making money throughout the school year. They sell produce direct from their gardens to teachers through CSAs in the fall and spring. They also sell their produce and products at pop-up markets around the holidays and farmers markets throughout the summer. They raise seedlings throughout late winter through mid-spring, and they receive contracts for knowledge share workshops with partner organizations in the DC area. So it really helps them continue to stay relevant year-round, even when the gardens are kind of sleeping through the winter. It is important to note, though, that the students did not start off with a diverse and sophisticated offering of products and services. Like this definitely evolved over time by asking questions about what available resources were present and the current capacity of the business. We considered elements such as seed money, space, storage, safety, and of course, who our audience is, who's buying our products. And we'll definitely go more into detail on how we considered these elements in the next slide.
All right, figuring out product pricing. So once you have your products or services that your team is sort of behind, everyone's in agreement, figuring out the cost is such a interesting exercise, in addition to being a really important piece of the business, obviously. And so when we sort of work with youth to figure out pricing, it can be a lot of fun brainstorming, and then the pricing discussion kind of makes a lot of the products and services feel really real. So sometimes this can be where some of the excitement gets derailed if you figure out that, for instance, the catnip toys you were making, you spend so much time making them that you couldn't possibly sell them for a price that people are going to buy them at. But also makes you money. So sort of thinking out those different pieces. And so that's one of the lessons learned that our youth figured out once they had made some of these toys. They were like, oh, this takes way too much time for us to actually make money at it. So I think the program manager has sort of this role between both building enthusiasm and exploring the big ideas, but also, making things really practical and sort of supporting that conversation as well. So these are some of the questions that we usually bring to youth, sort of what is the price per service or product? What is this product or service being sold, sort of similar things being sold? What's the competition? And thinking that piece out as well. And then thinking out your profit margin. So the difference between the cost of the production and is that selling point sort of large enough to make it worth all of your work? And then thinking through, time, all of your inputs is super important as well in having that conversation. And to this picture sort of shows some of the prices of the Mighty Green's current products, the chive blossom vinegar, their famous herb salts that are very popular around this time of year, and their tea line as well. All right, actually making the money. I think this is you, Lauren.
Thanks, Willa. I forgot to put myself off mute again. So once the youth have established the prices for their product line, the next step is to decide where it makes the most sense to sell the products. The type of market or sales that youth will promote their product or service at will be defined by the type of product or service your business has decided to focus on. Finding the right venue supports youth being seen as valuable vendors. You might want to consider trying one or two venues at a time as the students build their business and learn which types of venues are the best fit. The various venues that have been used by the Mighty Greens include school sales, nearby markets, recurring community events, holiday markets, and contracts. Online sales can also be considered as a potential vessel for selling products, but this hasn't always been the most practical for Mighty Greens. And this photo in the slide was from this past summer during the summer experience, where the students hosted a pay what you can market, which might be a good in between if you really want the students to start getting that entrepreneurial experience, but don't necessarily have the time or space to set prices, encouraging them to have a model where it's sliding scale accessible to everyone in the community, so that community members can really, share their own price. It also, if you have a mixed income neighborhood, you tend to make maybe more than you would otherwise, because people want to support the youth, and they're willing to pay a bit more for produce that they see the youth are working hard to grow themselves. So that might be a good in between as you're trying out the business, just kind of setting up on the sidewalk outside of the garden, having them host a market and really do that outreach in the community.
All right, managing the money. So once you figured out your products, your services, where you're selling, before you get too deep, we really recommend sort of thinking through the sort of management of finances. I think it really depends on where you're coming from, if you're an organization, if you're coming within the school, and really thinking through what you have capacity for. We're still learning a lot of things, but we have learned a lot, and definitely want to bring out some questions that have helped guide how we've managed the money for Mighty Greens. So thinking about where does the money go, and how it gets there is really important. As Lauren mentioned, we were able with a grant to give the youth some startup money. If you are able to find that kind of funding, it was really helpful in them building out their business. But even if it's not startup money, you can think about startup resources. Do they need to start with a bunch of free seeds that you can write a seed company if you're running a garden-based business? Maybe that's the resource that they're starting with. And then thinking about how the money is getting tracked as well is super important early on, so that you're not sort of making a bunch of money and then figuring it out as you go. Because Mighty Greens, as recognized by the government, is not a real business entity on its own, City Blossoms has a separate bank account where their money goes, so that we know sort of what money is coming in and how that's tracked. So it's a business, except when you get down to the government thinking about it as a business. Haven't quite gone on to that step yet. But that's been a really effective learning tool for us to think about tracking the money and separating it out so that it's very clear to the youth that it's their business, their money. Because often when you're starting out with a business on training wheels, you're probably not having the youth pay for every last thing. At least for us, we've defined things as sort of programmatic costs, materials that City Blossoms is responsible for purchasing, because without those materials, you can't run this program, feel important for the organization to pay for, versus a Mighty Greens cost, which may be something that is really fun or useful to their business, but it's not sort of a key component. For instance, they've paid for stickers and some temporary tattoos at certain points to sort of augment their brand and have it be something that they wanted but didn't necessarily need for the program to be run on the day-to-day. Really making space in some of those staff meetings to really talk money. This is super important as an educational tool, but also for sort of transparency to understand how much is the business really making? Where is that money going? How does that work? And thinking about reinvesting in the company, because any business, you've got to put money back in for it to continue to exist. So Mighty Greens has typically decided to reinvest 20% of their profits back into the company. And so that is money that the youth then get to decide what happens to it and what they want to be doing with it. And that has been a really important concept to sort of communicate, but also understand and sort of conceptualize. When it comes to paying youth, We are still learning so many things about this. If anyone has awesome ways to do this better, I would love to hear about them, because there's so many hurdles, and paying youth comes with so much responsibility. We really want to encourage everyone who hasn't done it to think it through. If you have done it, would love to hear sort of your best practices. But thinking through what's the best way for the youth, their families, and also your organization, because you've got to make sure you're looking out for your staff and their capacity as well. So we don't recommend cash payouts, but that might be what's best for your students. There's sort of obvious safety hazards around youth having large amounts of cash that they're carrying around. You could think about something like a prepaid debit card, which often come with fees, but is a good alternative to cash, although it doesn't allow for encouraging youth to sort of save. You can also think about electronic payment services, such as PayPal or something like Venmo, if you're working with youth who are banked. And then a paper check is an obvious example. Very easy paper trail, but often they get stolen, lost, etc., don't make it to someone in the mail, and then you sort of have to deal with figuring that all out. And then depending on how much youth are making, thinking about getting them to fill out W-9s and then sending them a 1099. And if that's something that your organization is ready to take on, but that has a lot of other things to think about as well, in terms of if you're giving youth the resources they need around doing their taxes and whether that affects their family. So before you start, paying youth large amounts of money, we just highly encourage thinking out all of these things in depth and figuring out what the best balance is for all the people involved. And the ultimate lesson learned is communication, sending letters home, having clear conversations with youth and their parents, so that the parents are also understanding this from the get-go before their child has even gotten that far into the program. They have an expectation as to what's happening as well. I don't want to take up too much more of our time. There's a lot to be learned from our standpoint as well here, but those are a few of the basic lessons learned that we've had from managing money with Mighty Greens.
All right. So beyond the money, are the roles and responsibilities of youth staff, and how we are really encouraging that youth leadership that we consider to be the cornerstone of why this works and why it's so successful. So helping everyone define roles and responsibilities is an important component in building the business. Establishing roles is an easy way to cultivate feelings of ownership and responsibility, and rotating roles is an easy way to delegate responsibilities and allows for the youth to build out different skills. The photo on this slide depicts a typical business meeting with former Mighty Greens member Camila walking other Mighty Greens members through the typical roles during markets: cashier, eye catcher, bagger, restocker, and recorder. Each of these roles were clearly defined by the students and help keep an organized and productive environment, which can be important when working with several youth at a farmer's market, as there are often plenty of distractions and lots of moving parts. Beyond market roles, the Mighty Greens team has also developed roles such as the Insta Garden team that helps keep our social media on point and up to date, and the Community Roots team that helps build team building activities and exercises, and the Mighty Memories team that helps capture the special moments and remind each other about the important impact of their work.
All right, so thinking about making space for reflecting on how your program is doing and whether it's set out to do whether or not it's doing what you set out to do is really important. Evaluation takes a lot of work, and again, something that we're still figuring out for sure. But thinking about how you're measuring the success and sort of taking space to reflect on the data and allowing for the data that you're collecting to inform your program so that you can continue to sort of improve and make sure that you're checking in with yourself is super important. We have developed a tracker that measures our quantitative data below. I just took sort of a screenshot of it. And that's how we record the number of students participating, sort of how they're participating. You can see that they've recorded where their different harvest is going. And you can't see the whole table, but it also records sort of participant hours. We didn't include that because it has their names, and obviously we don't want to be sharing their names on a large presentation like this, but sort of recording what each student is putting in based on the season. And for Mighty Greens, that impacts how much they're getting paid. So the youth decided that the more time you put into the business, the more you get paid out. So that's one of the ways that we like to record. That took a really long time for us to develop. We did not start there. So I think each organization has to figure out that balance between manageable workload, but also being able to provide quality programming and take space to evaluate it, because evaluation is obviously really important. And in addition to informing your programs is something that you're going to need for grants, presumably, to be able to show what it is you're doing. So I'm not going to spend too much longer on this slide because I want to make space for us to ask questions because we got a little bit of a late start. I want to make sure we get to open things up for discussion. But we are putting out a manual that sort of talks about this program and shares out lessons learned. It will be done very soon, and we're really excited to share it with you all. So we'll get everyone's emails if you want to just put it in the chat, and we'll make sure to put you on our list of people who get an electronic copy at least first thing as soon as it's ready and off the presses. So on that note, I want to make sure we get to questions. So we're going to skip that. And yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves or put things in the chat if you have questions or want to share anything out.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Thank y'all so much for all the information. This is super beneficial. And I have a few questions, but I'll start with my first one. And I'm curious if you could say, maybe you already said it, but if you could say again how long the program year is for Mighty Greens, and then what opportunities or how much change do program participants have over what's sold from year to year? Also curious how you factor in the seasonality of different things growing in the garden to continue on with being able to make products and sell products throughout the whole year.
Great.
Sorry, Willa, do you want to take that question? I'm just like copying emails.
Oh, awesome.
Into a document.
Yeah, so if I forget any parts of it, just make sure I actually answer your question. The program has been around, we first started it in 2012, our work at Eastern High School, but the business itself wasn't really started until the following year. There was a lot of groundwork that got us there. In terms of product change from year to year, Lauren, definitely jump in if I forget anything. We do try to encourage the youth to have some products that remain the same from year to year. Again, just thinking through like brand and also popularity. Like people really seek out the herb salts that the youth make, and it's a huge profit maker for them. And so encouraging them to think about that when they do change a product. That being said, like we have transition of like new youth coming through and wanting to make sure that like youth voice is incorporated from year to year. So they have sort of certain products, like right now they're experimenting with some new teas, I believe, that they do change up a little bit from year to year. So there's sort of a combination so that they're not starting with an entirely new product line every year, because that would be a lot.
Right, right. And my question was actually, how long is the program per year? But I'm assuming now that you're speaking more, it's just a school year. The students would start and finish at the end of the school year?
So I'm happy to give like I guess a brief overview of our full year with students. So typically we start in the fall. We're still honestly experimenting with our timeline, because typically, I guess in previous years, we started more of our in-person programming in the schools towards like October through, the holiday season, making sure that we can do holiday markets with the youth. And then going into, spring semester, we're actually still with the students starting when they get back right after winter break through the end of the school year. And then when the summer youth employment program starts for DC youth, we also hosted a summer youth employment program over 6 weeks until like really the first week of August. So it's really a full year program. But what we're learning now is that it's a lot for someone to manage, and there needs to be built-in like planning time, like in between like those seasons. So we're experimenting with that now. And really it's figuring out what works within the capacity that you have. And in that just is going to be a discovery over time.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I'm also curious what kind of support is available for students after they are done with your program. Like, let's say somebody is super into continuing to learn more about culinary practices of herbs or even medicinal herbs work that you all might do as well. Yeah, what does that support look like? Or is that kind of where you hope that community partnerships are stemming from?
Yeah. Willa, do you want to take that?
Definitely community partnerships, and making sure that while youth are in the program, they're having opportunities to network with a lot of partners in the region who they might want to connect to later on, so that they're coming out of this program with their kind of own network. And in addition to that, this is on a very small scale because it's not something we can offer to every youth who's of interest. We have developed a fellowship program that's still young, but our hope is that youth who are really connected to this work and see themselves as wanting to continue it down the line could become fellows later on. And that way we're hoping that we're building this pipeline of experiences so that someone who's particularly interested in pursuing this type of work could then become a staff person at City Blossoms, or a similar organization, if that was something that they were sort of particularly interested in pursuing.
Gotcha. That sounds amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We had another question. I believe we may be out of time. I apologize, but our emails are right here. Definitely encourage you all to reach out if there's any questions that we didn't have a chance to answer. And Alice, if you want to just email us your question, definitely would love to like share out anything that we've sort of learned, as well as sharing out our resources as soon as it's ready. we really appreciate y'all coming out and hanging out with us this morning.
Thank you so much for your work. It's just incredible. Really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, everyone have a wonderful weekend. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Bye.
See you, Willa.